Good evening, everyone. Welcome from the beautiful campus of Guilford College. My name is Marsh Prowse, and I've been asked to moderate tonight's mayoral candidates debate by the sponsors of the event, which are the Greensboro Neighborhood Congress, Guilford College, the Greensboro News and Record, and News 14 Carolina. I'd like to thank both of the candidates who made it past the primary for being here tonight. Closest to me is sitting Mayor Bill Knight, and to his left is sitting at-large council member Robbie Perkins. The first hour of this event will be taped to be rebroadcast. It will be available for viewing on News 14 Friday evening at 6 o'clock and Sunday morning at 11 a.m. Thereafter, it will be available for viewing on the internet, both at the News and Records website and also the News 14 website. The second hour will not be broadcast, but will be available for on-demand viewing on the internet. The way this is going to work tonight is we're going to take questions from the audience and also questions from a panel of media experts. We'll take one question from the audience, then one question from the panel. The candidates are going to take turns answering them first. So one candidate will answer a question from the audience first, and then a question from the panel first, and then for the two questions after that, it will be the other candidate's turn to go first. But each question will be answered by both candidates. At this point, I'd like to identify our panelists. We have Amanda Lamert from the News and Record to the left of the panel table. In the middle, we have Bob Costner from News 14. He's the senior reporter, and I should have said that Amanda is a reporter with the News Record. And at the right side of the panel table, we have Alan Johnson, who's the editorial page editor for the News and Record. I'd like to thank them for being here. Before we get into the question and answer, we're going to have each candidate give 90 seconds or up to 90 seconds of preliminary remarks. Based on a coin toss that was conducted before the event, it was decided that Bill Knight will address the audience first. So, Mr. Knight, you have 90 seconds.
Thank you, and good evening to everybody. And this is history for Greensboro, having a televised, I guess this is the first, a televised forum for candidates, and hopefully it is the first of many to come. And thank all of you here for this great turnout, and speaks well of Greensboro that there's such a broad representation. I have been mayor, and I hope I will have another opportunity. I have lived in Greensboro most of my life, grew up in Greensboro, raised a family in Greensboro, did business in Greensboro, retired in Greensboro. For those of you who don't know, I've been retired for just over 7 years. The question's been asked. I'm a little over 72 years of age, and still got a lot of fire left. But I've looked forward. I enjoy serving Greensboro, and I hope I'll have that opportunity again. We've got a good opportunity, I think, for you as voters to have some choices. There are some very different choices here in this election. I've described myself as a fiscal conservative, which I'm very proud to be. I think you'll find my candidate is of a more liberal persuasion, so I think there's a real choice there coming between us. And I look forward to a good debate and some good questioning, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor Knight. At-large Councilmember Perkins.
Thank you, Marsh. I moved to Greensboro in 1979 after graduating from Duke University with an undergrad degree majoring in history and religion and a master's in business administration. Took leadership Greensboro classes in the 1980s, and in 1993 was elected to the Greensboro City Council as the District 3 representative and served in that capacity until 2005. Took a couple of years off and then was reelected as an at-large member of the City Council, and I serve in that capacity today. I'm running for mayor because I would like to help our city and our City Council build a shared vision for this community. We've identified our priorities, and in fact the City Council identified priorities of economic development, public safety, and maintaining our infrastructure. And I'd like to make sure that we're focused on these three items as we move forward together as one community. I think I have the leadership skills and the ability to work with all of the members of the City Council to come up with that strategic vision and tell our city manager what we want to get done, and then hold him or her accountable for doing the implementation. I'm a strong believer in the city manager form of government, and we need to move forward with that type of system. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we'll begin to take the questions from the audience and questions from the panel. Again, to repeat, the questions from the audience are being submitted by neighborhood representatives who are here from, as I understand it, about 60 to 70 diverse neighborhoods throughout the city. The question that I have seen most often is some form of a question about the White Street landfill. We probably have a dozen of these up here. Obviously, it's been a major issue during the campaign. The one that we'll start off with is as follows. Candidates, what would you say to the Greensboro voter who feels that fact-based decision-making was abandoned by the council concerning the reopening of the White Street landfill, and who has no confidence that the decisions made were based on anything other than politics? And Mr. Perkins, you answer that one first.
A minute and a half for that one? Good luck. And good luck. You know, we spent 22 months working on the landfill, but the failure was not the issue. The failure was the process, because we, as a council, ignored the professional staff and their recommendations as to how to move through this process. There is no way in a minute and a half I can tell you all the ins and outs of the landfill selection. I can tell you that, in my opinion, reopening White Street 3.5 miles from Center City after a previous city council had earned the trust of the citizens in the area and all over Greensboro by saying, we're going to close it down, we're going to do something different because we think it's the right thing to do, doesn't make much sense. If you're going to hold yourself out as a progressive community that's going to move forward as one community and battle this global economy for prime jobs and prime opportunities for generations to come. We need to solve the landfill or the solid waste issue in Greensboro. And we need to solve it by coming up with a true long-term solution. White Street was a short-term solution. We would have faced the same problem in either 4.5 or 7 years.
Okay. In my opinion, White Street was not a political decision. It was begun by the previous council. We were handed the question that we began to deal with. It's interesting, there's been a lot of discussion, especially since election season started, that talk about a division and a long-term plan looking at regional waste disposal. For the last 16 years, my candidate's been on council. I haven't heard any of that. I'd like to know what was the decision, what drove, I'd love to hear the question asked, why was White Street closed when it was closed, when the city had spent millions of dollars to buy land, to expand, to plan for expansion, and then close it down, and then come up with a multi-million-dollar alternative that we still have today. That is not a solution. And so I hope that question will get answered. But we're going forward. Future city council is going to have to grapple with this. There's no question about it. We're going to have to look at recycling, and we're going to have to look at a solution. But it's no longer a question about how long it will last, but we're spending millions of dollars that we've got to find a way to recoup. Thank you.
Considering that the White Street landfill discussion didn't end the way either of you would have liked it, what should the council have done differently the last 2 years or before that?
I'm sorry, Mr. Perkins answers first.
Well, we put a contract in place that expired in the 1st of September. And so it was prudent for us to look at ways to save money on solid waste disposal. And so that process was started over 2 years before by the City Council to look at alternatives. What I think happened with this process is that the majority of the City Council got fixed on reopening White Street as the only alternative and didn't look at other options to save money. So we were driven by an end solution instead of a true fact-finding process. Now, I think we closed White Street simply because when you're a sitting council member and you're told that you have to find a way to dispose of your solid waste. You better have a solution. And we were uncertain at that point in time that we could permit the expansion phase of White Street in time to meet the demands of the solid waste disposal needs in Greensboro. So it became a puzzle. Do you retain your existing capacity and do something else? Or do you use it all up and risk that you can't get the permits in time?
Thank you, Mr. Knight.
Repeating that again, I can see how we're going to be around
What, if
it.
anything, should the council have done differently in the landfill deliberations?
Well, I think probably if we could have looked back, the prior council, before we took office, the prior council had looked, the mayor had presented a plan for operating the White Street landfill that didn't come to fruition. And that probably began the discussion, but had we had a plan handed to us, something, we've talked about long-term vision, which wasn't there. Had we had that handed to us, rather than finding a cost, I found out, and we found out, that instead of closing White Street and going to shipping our waste down to Montgomery County was costing $1 million a year, it turned out to be more like $7 million a year. One of the upshots of this has been, if nothing else, that our present end user has cut the cost by $3 million. So the discussion has not been a total loss, that we did cut costs. But it would have been good had we been handed a plan coming forward, because it's been around for a long time, for years and years and years. Millions of dollars have been spent, and White Street still sits there unused. So, we're going to have to go to work. Many aspects to look at. Thank you.
Thank you. We're into the next cycle now, so this time Mayor Knight will answer the questions first. The next question from the audience essentially asks the candidates what their perspective is on how much money does some controversial issue have to save the city for it to be worth raising? In other words, can you put a price on community unity? Is there something that it gets to a point in terms of a certain number of millions of dollars where it's worth opening a can of worms, is the phrase that was used in the question? Mr. Knight, you're first on that.
That is a little bit of an open-ended question. I guess it depends on the situation. The question is, how much is it worth? I don't know. I wish the question were a little bit more specific. The city has spent, I know a few years ago when the police department was being ravaged and given a pretty rough time, there were perhaps millions of dollars spent in legal fees. So was that enough or not too much? I don't know. Certainly there's been some money spent on the landfill. I don't think, not nearly as much. And there have been other cases. So I don't know, that's a question. I think it depends on the circumstance and what the situation is. If we're looking at a development issue, be it bond or just a capital project, it could be that we need to spend a significant amount. But it's all about planning for the city manager and staff to get in and plan. They're always good about bringing us cost estimates before we get into these areas. Thank you.
Mr. Perkins?
Well, your mayor and your members of city council have to be good stewards of the taxpayers' money. But they also have to earn, by each decision they make, the trust of our citizens. And when we make a decision by weighing the options on right and wrong cost issues, we're trying to make that decision in the best interest of the entire community in Greensboro. Now, it's always going to be cheaper to expand an existing landfill. But how long are you going to have a landfill 3.5 miles from the center of your city? And how long are you going to continue to drive trucks through neighborhoods on a constant basis, when, in fact, you might not be able to gain permits to expand that landfill forever? At some point in time, you have to deal with solid waste. And you deal with it by coming up with a long-term sustainable solution. It's not going to get any cheaper to do, but you should do it on a regional basis, because in the landfill business, it's an economy of scale business. The more tons you can put together, the more efficiently you can process it. And as a region, we need to solve this problem. No one wants a landfill in their backyard.
Thank you, Mr. Perkins. Next question is from panel member Bob Costner.
Gentlemen, there's certainly a perception that the current council's terms has been marked by a fair amount of conflict and divisiveness. If elected, what will you do to address the problem, and what have you done in your current term?
Thank you. As mayor, I am presiding officer, and we have had some issues in the council meetings. The word dysfunctional has come up from time to time. And I would remind you that if some of you do come to council members, some of you watch it on TV, some of you may do neither. But it takes the cooperation of all 9 council members to have an orderly meeting. And when I have council members sitting down at the end of the row, my opponent and his colleague next, texting, talking, exhorting the audience to not cooperate, not participate in the meeting, and not be quiet, then it makes it difficult. Frankly, I have to be very frank about that. It makes it very difficult. But we have to work together. We start with a retreat. The very first thing we will do as a new council, we start with a retreat. We set our priorities, and we work together respectfully. We can do that. But it takes 9 people working together. In our form of government, the mayor has limited ability. It requires cooperation from all the council members. And I've had times when that hasn't happened, and frankly, it's a problem. So I would ask for that cooperation. Thank you.
Mr. Perkins?
You know, it seems like to me that it's the mayor's responsibility to communicate with all the council members, not just the ones that the mayor agrees with. And I think the failure in this council to function as we should is a failure for us to communicate consistently on the issues. Take, for example, this landfill issue. When you cannot, as a city council member, even have a discussion about a relatively recent development in Randolph County, not even have that discussion, and not even have our professional staff evaluate that option, nor will the sitting council allow for our own people to put in a bid to compare the public sector versus the private sector on solid waste disposal, it's very hard to keep a citizenry that feels that they're being imposed on checked at council meetings. So I think the basic function of the mayor is to make sure that everybody gets heard, everybody has a fair shake, and that we at least attempt to hear everyone's perspective.
Thank you. Continuing in the same fashion, the next 2 questions will be answered by Mr. Perkins first. I'd also like to ask one more time, everyone, please submit your questions in a way that they can be answered by both candidates. I'm still getting some questions that are addressed to just one or the other candidate, and it's hard to make those work. The next question I had was, and again, this is to Mr. Perkins first, do you have one overriding principle that drives your decision-making as a public servant, and what is it?
Well, I think the overriding principle is how do we work together to build trust in our community. I think that's where we have to start with the foundation. Because if our citizens don't trust what we're saying, then we're going to have a problem with the implementation phase. And so trust is first, and then process allows you to take that trust and put it into action.
For me, it's all about honesty, integrity, and trust. And I can be mayor, I have no conflict of interest, and I can get along. I have to say, going back to what was said by my opponent a couple of minutes ago, I had been mayor for barely 1 week when we had our first retreat. And he basically got in my face because I wasn't going to give him a commission appointment that he wanted. Now, you talk about trust. I mean, that's in trying to work together. That's tough. But I'll say one thing, I've got spine, and I don't mind making a decision. I don't mind taking the heat for it when the time comes. But it's all about honesty, integrity, and trust, and belief in God. Thank you.
Next question from the panel is from Mr. Johnson, and it goes to Mr. Perkins first.
Question for both gentlemen is, how will you as mayor be accessible to all of the citizens?
Well, you know, when you're talking about all the citizens these days, you're talking about a wide range of demographics, ages, everything. And we communicate today much differently than when I first came on city council in 1993. We didn't know what a text message was in 1993. We barely got off fax machines and started with email. But it's important that you understand the power of how to communicate with your citizens. Number one, I think one of the biggest things that we've done is Channel 13. You can't believe how many people see us in the grocery store and say, I know you. And then from somewhere, you're on the Guilford County Commission, aren't you? And I say, no, I'm on the Greensboro City Council. I've got a very popular cell phone number. It's been around since 1987. And I have my office phone at my desk listed as my preference from a contact standpoint. And I do return emails and text messages. So I will communicate with the citizens.
Thank you. It's been a great pleasure being mayor, getting to meet a lot of people. And I guess I must have, from what I hear, the most recognizable face in Greensboro these days. But seriously, talk about access. It's been my pleasure to meet a lot of people. I go a lot of places. I see a lot of people. But importantly, I have a lot of people coming to visit the mayor's office. It can be individuals, groups, ethnic groups. It's been a real pleasure to have international visitors. In Greensboro, we've got a number of ethnic communities, which has been a delight to get to know from around the world, really. And very proud people. And I've certainly enjoyed that. I've participated in just a whole host of things, from Mali to Kwanzaa to Scandinavian countries to Southwest Pacific to citizens in Greensboro, business people coming. And I spend a lot of time out talking in the business community. So I've made myself accessible, and as I've always done all my career, and I enjoy it, and I think it serves the city very, very well. And from what I hear, the feedback I get, I must be doing a pretty good job at it. Thank you.
Thank you. Next two questions are to Mayor Knight first. I'm going to try to combine 2 or 3 questions here. They're basically about the dollars and cents of the landfill. One asks how much money the city has been cost by the closure of the White Street landfill. And then the second one asks about the bankruptcy in Philadelphia, which I believe is Harrisburg. They put Philadelphia, I think they meant Pennsylvania. Harrisburg is facing bankruptcy because of some solid waste issues. And they're basically saying, sure there are other issues, but what do you have to say about the financial ramifications of our solid waste decision making? And that goes to Mayor Knight first.
The cost aspect, and these numbers are verifiable, but and I think council 10 years ago was told that the additional cost in going to a transfer station would be about $1 million, $1.05 million a year. It turns out to be over $7 million a year, and you can do the math on that. And it makes me understand some of the decisions prior councils have made. When we came to office, we had a 10-year backlog of unissued bonds that were about set to expire, and there were millions of dollars in bonds. And I'm trying to think, why was that? Well, I began to understand. But these are monies that the city could be using. So a lot of money. I mean, we're talking about $100 million over 20 years. The Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, near bankruptcy, that, from what I know, or whether they've declared or not, I don't know, but they went through a major expenditure on an incinerator method they used, and apparently some real mismanagement. I don't know the details, but they really got in deep over that. So that's a problem. Greensboro has not had that problem. Thank you.
Well, it's hard to say what this has truly cost the community, because you have to make an assumption that you could have permitted the expansion of the Whitesville landfill in 2003. Had you not been able to permit that landfill, you wouldn't have the savings that people have been talking about. In fact, when we did the last round of proposals to reopen White Street, the bidder that the majority of the council wanted to award a contract to submitted a proposal that our professional staff evaluated and said that it would save us $3,077,000 per year. And that would be the savings to the community. But that savings would only occur during the 7 years that the contract was for. At the end of 7 years, if you couldn't expand phases 4 and 5, you were out of capacity and you were back at square one. So thankfully, we're able to go back and reconsider this whole decision in the realm of what is the best method of disposing our solid waste for our community. The reason Harrisonburg got in trouble is they went out in front of the technology, and they bought something that didn't work and spent hundreds of millions of dollars on that technology. We need to wait until it's perfected before we invest in that type of technology in Greensboro.
Next question from the panel is for Ms. Lamert.
Thank you. Some residents have accused the current city council of not listening. Has a speaker from the floor ever changed your mind on an issue?
I listen. We have a lot of speakers. And to answer your question, yes. What I would say, it has formed an opinion. There's a program that I've been working with city staff on for almost a year and a half now, something called Rebuild Greensboro. It's going to be small, but it's going to impact some of the more distressed communities. And that was the result of a speaker from the floor saying something that really struck a chord with me and got me up in the middle of the night. And we shall see. It's going to be small, but I'm hoping it's going to be something that can grow and be good for a lot of disadvantaged youth, and also help some distressed housing and have some really good results without the expenditure of government money. We shall see. Thank you.
You know, it takes a lot of courage for a citizen to come from their home, drive downtown, find a parking spot, walk on inside a big building, sign up, wait. In the case of before, it was at the beginning of the meeting. Now they might wait 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 hours to be heard. Take a deep breath, walk to the front of the room, stand in front of television lights, and tell their city council about their problem. Now, they may not say it like we would say it, because we kind of have a little bit more practice, but you have to make the basic assumption that they need our help. And that's the single biggest benefit of the speakers from the floor, allowing someone to get help from their elected body. And yes, people that have spoken from the floor have made a difference. Single biggest one in my term on council was a speaker from the floor that said we need to open each city council meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. We did that, and that's significant. Thank you.